Where is Angelica Hale from America's Got Talent now? She once stood on a stage barely tall enough to see over the judge's desk, and within seconds, she had an entire arena in tears. A voice like that shouldn't come from someone so small, people said. But then they learned her story, a story that started not in a recording studio or a vocal coach's living room, but in a hospital bed, fighting for her next breath. Years have passed since that unforgettable night on America's Got Talent, and the girl who once seemed like a fleeting viral moment has quietly built one of the most remarkable and enduring careers to ever come out of that stage. So what happened to Angelica Hale? Where did that voice take her? And just how far has she traveled since the finale lights went down? The answer might surprise you, because this isn't just a story about a singing competition. It's a story about survival, reinvention, and a girl who refused to let one chapter define the rest of her life. A childhood interrupted. Long before reality television ever knew her name, Angelica Hale was just a toddler in Atlanta, Georgia, growing up in a Filipino-American household that valued faith, family, and music in equal measure. By most accounts, she was a naturally joyful kid, the type who would break into song at the dinner table or perform little concerts for relatives without any prompting. Nobody around her was chasing fame. Nobody had any reason to think their daughter was destined for a stage. Then at 4 years old, everything changed in the span of a few days. What began as what looked like an ordinary infection spiraled with terrifying speed into double pneumonia, and from there into sepsis, a condition where the body's own immune response begins attacking its organs. Angelica's kidneys started failing. Doctors placed her into a medically induced coma and put her on ECMO, a machine that does the work of the heart and lungs when a body can no longer manage on its own. She underwent both hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis, cycling in and out of some of the most invasive treatments modern medicine has to offer, and she remained hospitalized for nearly 3 months while her body fought to hold on. It's the kind of ordeal that would leave lifelong scars on any family, let alone one with a 4-year-old at its center. When Angelica was finally stable enough to be discharged, she still wasn't free. Dialysis became her routine, a repeating reminder that her body was surviving, not thriving. That changed when her mother, Eva, turned out to be a near-perfect match for a kidney donation. In September of 2013, the transplant surgery went forward, and it worked. Angelica Hale had a new kidney, a second chance, and, as it would turn out, an entirely new relationship with the idea of using her voice for something bigger than herself. The voice that grew out of a hospital room. What's easy to forget looking back at her AGT run is that Angelica's singing didn't start as a hobby waiting to be discovered by producers. It started as therapy. During those brutal months in the hospital, her family says she would sing quietly to herself between treatments, almost like a way of proving to her own body that she was still there, still fighting, still herself. Home videos from that period, later uploaded online by her father, show a small child using music the way some people use prayer. As she healed, that instinct only deepened. She gravitated toward the kind of powerhouse vocalists who don't just hit notes, but seem to carry emotional weight in every phrase, chief among them, Whitney Houston. Hearing Greatest Love of All for the first time reportedly struck something in her, and she began, in her own small way, trying to chase that same depth of feeling in her own singing. It wasn't about mimicking a famous voice. It was about learning that a song could hold pain and hope in the same breath. Recognizing what they had on their hands, her parents enrolled her in vocal lessons with coaches in the Atlanta area, and soon she was performing, not on television yet, but at retirement homes, charity galas, and community events, including an appearance at the Make-A-Wish Foundation Ball and a slot at the U.S. Open. These weren't glamorous bookings. They were the unglamorous reps that build an artist before the cameras ever show up, and they gave a young girl who had nearly died in a hospital bed the quiet confidence that she belonged on a stage. 9 years old and unstoppable. In 2017, at just 9 years old, Angelica Hale walked out under the lights of America's Got Talent for Season 12 and delivered a rendition of Andra Day's Rise Up that instantly reframed what people expected from a child performer. It wasn't cute. It wasn't precocious. It was by most accounts genuinely moving, a performance built on real vocal control and an emotional maturity that had clearly been shaped by everything she'd already survived. The judges were visibly stunned, and she advanced with resounding support. From there, her run through the competition became appointment viewing. A commanding performance of Alicia Keys' Girl on Fire during the Judge Cuts round prompted guest judge Chris Hardwick to hit the golden buzzer, sending her straight into the live shows and instantly making her one of the season's most talked about contestants. Week after week, She kept climbing, tackling songs by Zedd, David Guetta, and Clean Bandit, each performance treated less like a competition routine and more like a genuine emotional statement. In the finale, she even shared the stage with Kelly Clarkson. When the results came in, Angelica finished as the runner-up behind ventriloquist Darcy Lynn, becoming the youngest runner-up in the show's history at that point. It stung, of course. No competitor wants to fall just short of the top spot, but in hindsight, second place turned out to be the beginning, not the ceiling, of her story. Media outlets took notice of just how deeply her performances landed with audiences, describing her as a performer whose emotional range seemed to defy her age, and her AGT run helped spark a broader conversation about just how much young performers are capable of carrying on a mainstream stage. Coming back stronger on The Champions, Angelica returned in 2019 for AGT, The Champions, a special edition of the show that brought back standout performers from around the world, a lineup that, by its very nature, only invites acts who've already proven they can move an audience. At 11 years old, she was noticeably more mature, both vocally and in her stage presence, than the 9-year-old fans remembered from 2 years earlier. Her comeback performance of Rachel Platten's Fight Song, a song whose lyrics about resilience mirrored her own biography almost too perfectly, earned her a second Golden Buzzer, this time from Howie Mandel, making her one of the only contestants in the show's history to receive the honor twice. She followed that with an emotionally raw performance of Chantel's Impossible, once again leaving the judges visibly moved. The Champions run didn't just remind people that Angelica Hale was talented, it repositioned her, in the eyes of both fans and critics, as a serious artist rather than a novelty act who happened to be young. It was less a comeback than a formal introduction to who she was becoming. Life after the buzzer, the big stages. Once the television cameras moved on, Angelica's career didn't slow down, it diversified. She sang the national anthem at multiple NFL games, including matchups involving her hometown Atlanta Falcons, and performed at NHL games as well. She appeared in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, sang on Steve Harvey's Little Big Shots, and joined the America's Got Talent Live tour, performing in front of large crowds night after night in a way that no television audition round could replicate. Each of these appearances functioned as proof of concept, evidence that the girl from AGT could hold her own in front of live, unscripted audiences on some of the country's biggest stages. Her international profile grew, as well. In 2019, she joined the Filipino group TNT Boys on their Listen, the world tour, performing in cities across North America and leaning into her Filipino heritage as part of her artistic identity. She's spoken openly in interviews about wanting to represent Filipino and Asian American kids who don't always see themselves reflected in mainstream American entertainment, framing her visibility not just as a personal win, but as part of a larger, slow shift toward more inclusive representation in the arts. Finding her own words. Somewhere around age 11, Angelica made a pivot that a lot of talent show alumni never manage. She started writing her own music. Her 2019 debut single, Feel the Magic, marked her shift from a covers-based performer to a genuine singer-songwriter, and it was followed by an EP of the same name that leaned into more personal, emotionally direct songwriting, including a track called Overcome that drew explicitly from her medical history. She also released holiday-themed EPs and singles like No Time to Waste, some of the proceeds from which went towards sepsis awareness efforts, tying her music directly back to the cause closest to her own story. This period mattered because it separated Angelica Hale, the reality show contestant, from Angelica Hale, the artist. Plenty of talent show finalists never managed that transition. She did, releasing music across major streaming platforms and slowly building a body of original work rooted in themes of survival, self-belief, and healing, the same themes that had defined her life since she was 4 years old. From reality TV to the Broadway stage. If there's a single moment that best captures how far Angelica Hale has come, it's this. On April 5, 2025, she made her Broadway debut at the Broadhurst Theater in New York City, starring as Trisha in Boop. The musical, a stage reimagining of the classic Betty Boop cartoon character built around David Foster's music. It wasn't a sudden leap. She had actually originated the role of Trisha during the show's pre-Broadway run in Chicago back in 2023, meaning she spent roughly 2 years growing alongside the character before the show ever reached New York. Portland Talent recap. Her role as Trisha, a teenage artist and cosplayer who idolizes Betty Boop, turned out to resonate with Angelica on a surprisingly personal level. In interviews around the Broadway opening, She described watching every Betty Boop cartoon she could find to prepare for the part, and she's spoken about seeing pieces of her own younger self in Trisha's insecurity and eagerness to be seen. She admitted that despite Trisha's obvious talent on stage, the character is still someone unsure of herself underneath, and that channeling that vulnerability night after night has, in a strange way, helped Angelica work through some of her own old insecurities about her voice. Before landing the role, she had also built screen credits in the 2022 film American Reject and lent her voice to animated projects including Maya Unstoppable, giving her a well-rounded resume heading into her Broadway run. Girls Life Facebook. Where is she now? As of the most recent reporting available, Angelica Hale is 17 years old, still based in Atlanta, and continuing to perform 8 shows a week as Trisha in Boop, the musical on Broadway. She's balancing that demanding schedule with the ordinary milestones of being a teenager. By her own account, she's preparing to graduate from high school, and she said she plans to return her focus to releasing original music once that chapter closes. In other words, the girl who once sang her way through a coma-inducing illness is now navigating something almost more universal, figuring out what comes after high school, except she's doing it while starring in a Tony-nominated Broadway show, Broadway World Fort Lauderdale. She's remained candid in interviews about the emotional side of her career, encouraging young performers to stay resilient, particularly against the pressures of social media, and reminding fans, in her own words, not to let anyone make them feel embarrassed about who they are. It's advice that lands differently coming from someone who spent her earliest years fighting simply to survive, and her teenage years learning to be seen. Alongside her performing career, Angelica has remained deeply committed to health advocacy. She continues to serve as a voice for kidney health as the National Kidney Foundation's first-ever Kid Ambassador, and her partnership with the Sepsis Alliance, including the It's About Time awareness campaign, has helped put a recognizable face on a condition that still kills thousands of people every year, many of them because the warning signs go unnoticed. Her advocacy work isn't a side project tacked onto her music career. It's arguably the foundation the rest of her career was built on. A story still being written. What makes Angelica Hale's story compelling isn't just the singing, or the golden buzzers, or even the Broadway marquee with her name near the top of the cast list. It's the through line connecting all of it back to a 4-year-old who nearly didn't make it out of a hospital room. Every stage she's stood on since then, from a semi-final round on AGT to the Broadhurst Theater on 44th Street, has in some sense been an extension of that first, quiet act of singing to herself in a hospital bed, just to prove she was still there. She hasn't just survived her illness. She's built an entire artistic identity out of processing it, through music that names her own scars, through advocacy that might genuinely help other families facing the same emergency room diagnosis, and now through a Broadway role that, fittingly, is about a character learning that she's more capable than she believes. If her career so far is any indication, whatever Angelica Hale chooses to do after Boop, whether that's more original music, more Broadway, or something nobody has predicted yet, it's probably going to be worth paying attention to. If this look at Angelica Hale's journey moved you, let us know in the comments what part of her story stuck with you the most. And if you want more stories about the AGT alumni who turned a talent show moment into a lifelong career, make sure you're subscribed, because there are plenty more still to tell.